Rub a raw clove of garlic on the sole of your foot, and roughly 60 minutes later, you'll taste it in your mouth. The molecules are small enough to slip straight through skin cells and ride your bloodstream north. That single fact means your skin is not the sealed wrapper you think it is. It's already a kind of hole, just one too small to see. How many holes does a human body actually have? And is there one true number, or does the answer change depending on who's counting? Most people blurt out 7, 8, or 9 without hesitation. Nostrils, ears, eyes, mouth, and the rest. That confident number falls apart within seconds once you ask what actually counts as a hole in the first place. If a taste can travel through solid skin, what else is quietly passing through you that you've never noticed? 60 billion invisible bullets are passing through you right now. Every single second, day and night, about 60 billion neutrinos from the sun pass straight through something as small as your thumbnail. Neutrinos move through solid matter, including your entire body, almost as if it weren't there at all. At that scale, the human body isn't a solid object that has holes. It's a loose, mostly empty scatter of atoms with gaps between every molecule. That means the honest answer to how many holes do you have at the atomic level is effectively infinite, which makes the question useless without a rule. To get anywhere, you need to pick a minimum size for what counts as a hole, and the size chosen decides the entire final number before you count a single opening. The size scientists settle on is about 20 to 60 millionths of a meter, roughly the width of a single human hair, but why draw the line exactly there? Picture a microscopic vessel about 60 microns wide, the width of a human hair, sent to explore every opening on your body. That ship could sail straight into a sweat pore or a hair follicle like flying into a crater. But it would hit a dead end at narrow capillaries built to block anything larger than a single blood cell. The same ship could be threaded into your mouth, sail the length of your gut, and exit cleanly out the other end without ever running aground. That difference splits every opening on your body into two totally different categories: dead end, blind holes, and fully connected through holes. Sweet pores, hair follicles, ears, nostrils on their own, and the urethra are all blind holes. Explorable, but ultimately traps. Only one structure in the entire human body is a guaranteed through hole so far. So which one is it? And how many others are secretly connected to it? A gunshot that enters the chest, punches through the esophagus, and exits the other side doesn't just make one new hole. Mathematically, it creates two, because it opens a fresh through tunnel connecting 2 points that weren't linked before. A piercing through soft tissue like an earlobe adds one hole to your permanent count. But a piercing that happens to skewer a tear duct and exit elsewhere would count as two. Trauma surgeons routinely cut emergency through tunnels into the body. A needle jammed into the windpipe below a blocked airway. A cricothyroidotomy creates a hole that didn't exist 5 minutes earlier and can save a life in under 60 seconds. None of this shows up in any anatomy textbook, because textbooks assume a standard body that never gets shot, pierced, or cut open. That means your personal hole count isn't fixed at birth. It can go up for the rest of your life depending on what happens to you. If trauma and piercings can add holes, could a doctor also make holes disappear? And does that mean the true number was never really fixed at all? Mathematicians have a running joke that a topologist can't tell the difference between a coffee cup and a donut, because one can be smoothly reshaped into the other without cutting, tearing, or gluing anything. That smooth reshaping is called a homeomorphism, and it's the mathematical rule that decides whether two objects truly have the same holes. The handle of the coffee cup and the hole of the donut are the exact same hole, just stretched into a different shape. This rule matters because it means shape and size are irrelevant to counting holes. Only the connections matter. Under this rule, a blind hole, like a pore or an ear canal, can be smoothed away completely, mathematically erased, because nothing forces it to stay open. If blind holes can vanish under the right kind of stretching, does that mean most of what you'd call holes on your body don't actually count at all? Most people assume a drinking straw has two holes, one for your mouth, one for the glass, but topologically it only has one. Stretch one end of a straw wide and flatten it out, and it smoothly becomes the outer rim of a donut, proving both openings were really just two ends of a single tunnel the whole time. The same logic applies to a bowl versus a plate. Mold a bowl flatter and its hole quietly disappears with no cutting or gluing required. So where exactly did it go? This proves openings and holes are not the same thing. An object can have many openings that all belong to the exact same hole. Applying this to the human body means your mouth and anus, despite being two separate openings on opposite ends of you, might mathematically count as a single hole. If two openings can be one hole, how many of the 7 or 8 openings on your body are secretly just entrances to the same tunnel? Follow the gut on its roughly 30-foot journey from mouth to anus, and you get exactly one through hole. Congratulations, you're topologically a single donut so far. Add both nostrils, which merge into one shared cavity behind your nose before connecting to that same throat, and the count rises to 3 holes. Add the 4 lacrimal puncta, tiny drainage points at the inner corner of each eyelid, each about 1/3 of a millimeter wide, which drain tears into that same nasal cavity, and the number climbs to 7. Every one of those 8 external openings, mouth, 2 nostrils, 4 tear ducts, anus, funnels into one shared internal space, which is what makes them mathematically connected rather than separate. Squish and simplify that 7-hole shape, and it resolves into something almost absurd. 4 pairs of pants sewn together at the waist, a literal bodysuit shape for a 7-legged creature. If the standard human is a 7-hole donut, why does the female body sit at a completely different number? And what single structure is responsible for the extra hole? Behind your nose sits the nasal cavity, a hollow, air-filled chamber lined with mucus-covered ridges called turbinates that warm and filter every breath you take. This single chamber is the secret hub where your 2 nostrils, your throat, and all 4 tear ducts physically converge into one shared space. Your ears almost connect to this hub too. The Eustachian tube runs from the middle ear down into the nasal cavity, but the intact eardrum blocks the path, keeping the ear a dead end rather than a through tunnel. That's the exact mechanism behind popping your ears. Swallowing or yawning briefly opens that collapsed tube to equalize pressure without ever creating an actual through hole. As many as half of all people also carry at least one accessory ostium, an extra, naturally occurring hole connecting a sinus directly to this same nasal cavity, quietly adding another through tunnel most people will never know they have. If nearly half the population is walking around with an undiscovered extra hole in their own skull, how would you even find out how many you personally have? Troll back to the 3rd week after conception, and the human embryo is a flat, 3-layered disc with no mouth, no anus, and no openings of any kind. The mouth doesn't exist until around week 4, when a thin membrane sealing the front of the developing gut is destroyed by programmed cell death and ruptures open. The anus follows the same pattern days later, as a separate membrane at the tail end of the embryo breaks down after a dividing wall splits the primitive gut opening in 2. Between weeks 5 and 8, the gut tube actually fills solid with rapidly multiplying cells, sealing itself shut again, before tiny fluid pockets merge to hollow it back out. A process called recanalization. When that process fails, babies are born with conditions like imperforate anus, where a hole that should exist simply never opened. If every hole on your body had to be actively built through a sequence that can fail at any step, is how many holes do you have ever really a fixed guaranteed number? In biological females, the fallopian tubes don't dead end inside the body. Each one opens directly into the abdominal cavity through finger-like structures called fimbriae. That means there's a continuous, if narrow, pathway from the outside world through the vagina, uterus, and fallopian tubes into the abdominal cavity itself, something the male body has no equivalent of. Under the same topological math used to reach 7 holes for the male body, adding this pathway brings the female total to 8. This single structure is also medically significant. It's the route by which infections can occasionally travel from outside the body into the abdominal cavity. Every other candidate structure, the urethra, the ear canals, the eyes, dead ends at a membrane or a capillary bed too narrow to pass through, so none of them add to the count, with men and women landing on 2 different official numbers. Whose number is actually correct, and does anyone stay fixed for life? Surgeons who operate near the base of the skull work around more than 20 major foramina, natural perforations in bone that let nerves and blood vessels pass through, including the foramen magnum, where the spinal cord itself threads through the skull. These skeletal holes are completely different from surface openings. They're internal, permanently packed with tissue, and invisible from outside the body entirely. Sinus cavities are officially blind pockets, hollow rooms in the bones of your face. But the accessory ostia mentioned earlier turn some of them into genuine through holes without anyone realizing. Doctors can only confirm a person's exact accessory ostia count through detailed CT imaging, meaning most people will live and die never knowing their true number. Add a colostomy, a tracheostomy, or a feeding tube, all common surgical procedures, and a person can gain an entirely new permanent through hole later in life that no anatomy chart accounted for. With bone, surgery, and hidden sinus passages all adding uncounted holes, is there any single group of experts whose number can actually be trusted as final? A surgeon counting visible external openings lands on 7 for men and 8 for women. Mouth, nostrils, ears, anus, urethra, plus the vagina in females. A physiologist studying tissue continuity throws that number out entirely and calls the digestive tract one single continuous tube, arguing that food technically never enters the inside of your body until it crosses the gut lining. A topologist ignores openings altogether and counts only through tunnels, arriving at the 7 or 8-hole donut figure built from mouth, nostrils, tear ducts, and anus. All three experts are examining the identical human body and are all technically correct. They're just answering 3 different questions using 3 different rulebooks. This is exactly why the debate flares up endlessly online. Most people arguing about it don't realize they're each defending a different definition without ever saying so out loud. So which of these 3 answers actually resolves the question this video opened with? And is any one of them the real answer? There is no single correct number because the word whole was never a precise scientific term to begin with. It's a fuzzy, everyday word doing duty across medicine, biology, and mathematics. The anatomical count, 7 or 8, the physiological count, 1 continuous tube, and the topological count, genus 7 or 8, are not competing wrong answers. They're 3 correct answers to 3 different questions. Your personal number isn't even fixed for your own lifetime. Piercings, surgery, trauma, and undiscovered accessory ostia mean it can rise without your knowledge. The deepest twist isn't biological at all. It's that a question this simple exposes how every scientific field secretly builds its own private definition of reality before it ever starts measuring anything. The next time someone confidently says, "Humans have 8 holes," the honest response isn't a number. It's, which kind of hole are you counting, and by whose rulebook? One-sentence twist. You were never a body with a fixed number of holes. You were always a body whose hole count depends entirely on the question being asked.